Ah, the modern day, a place where a woman cannot behave or act or like anything without some person trying to criticize her for it. And unfortunately, this sentiment, of course, has translated into the fiction that we read, and more importantly, it's translated into how we critique female characters. Hi guys, my name is Courtney and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the YA heroine and kind of my own personal relationship with these characters, growing up with them, how I've related to them, how I've not related to them, and hopefully I'm going to be providing a little bit more nuance. I think a lot of times with the topic of the Not Like Other Girls or the Mary Sue character, we kind of boil it down a little bit too quickly and we don't really dive deep into the examples of the characters that we actually have. Because while I do think that these trends and archetypes, especially like not great archetypes, exist, there are obviously female characters that I didn't relate to or didn't like growing up, but I also think that there needs to be a little bit of nuance when we look at these characters, because when you dive into specific examples, one, it either, is exactly that trope and it provides something that's really interesting and fascinating to me, in my opinion, or it kind of contradicts a lot of the things that we kind of assume about these characters. And what I mean is, a lot of times we overly criticize some of these female characters without really getting too deep into why they were important, why people liked them, maybe why they don't fit the tropes as much as we think they do. Yeah, I've just been thinking about this topic for a really long time and I really wanted to do a discussion video on it. So of course, YouTube decided to recommend me a video that talked exactly about this thing. So I just watched I'm Not Like Other Girls in Young Adult Books by the book Leo. She did an excellent video. I will be putting it into the comments if you want more of like a general overview of what I'm talking about of YA fiction and the trends. Basically in her video she does a little bit of a timeline of the YA heroine, kind of their characteristics, how they acted, and how they've changed throughout the years, and like how that kind of matched up with the timeline of the Not Like Other Girls meme that was really popular on like Tumblr and stuff. And she kind of concludes with this idea of the feminine contradiction, which is female readers especially want a female character that doesn't relate to femininity, that doesn't like femininity, but also gets the desired benefits of what someone would get if they were feminine. Basically being like, they get the boy at the end, they get like the makeover scene where they get to feel beautiful and wonderful. Basically they're in this weird space where they have femininity acted upon them, where they are changed to be more beautiful, where they're seen as more beautiful by their male love interests, but they also get to hate on girls that don't like feminine things and get to not relate to femininity. And I think this is a really, really good video, a really interesting discussion. But I personally want to dive into the characters themselves and dive in a little bit deeper with different things and get into like my own personal feelings about this. But first, let's kind of go over the timeline that I have. There are some overlaps with her video, but hopefully providing some information so you guys know what I'm talking about. So, YA fiction. It's been around forever. It's kind of been melded in with the children's fiction for a very long time, until Twilight. Twilight really changed the genre. Yes, there was a YA section in Barnes & Noble before Twilight, but because of Twilight, that YA fiction shelf really expanded into popular demand and it became a thing. From the point of Twilight, YA fiction really branched off and just became its own thing, very separate from children's fiction. So with Twilight, you get the main character of Bella. I think Bella is a really great example of the YA paranormal genre character type. Bella inspired the paranormal Spike, so it makes sense that a lot of characters are really similar to her. Bella, in my opinion, is like a self-insert kind of character. She doesn't have like a lot of personality. She doesn't have like a lot of likes and dislikes, to be honest. She really only likes like a couple books, Linkin Park, and like cooking for her dad. Like she doesn't do a lot of things. She doesn't have a lot of hobbies. She kind of reluctantly has friends. I think especially with TikTok and memes, we found like a kind of charm to Bella and her weirdness and just kind of her like shtick. But like in book, as a young reader, as like a 12-year-old, 13-year-old reader when I was reading her, I wasn't like the biggest fan of Bella, to be honest. I wanted her to like more things, I wanted her to have hobbies and friends, and it kind of annoyed me that she didn't. But with Bella, with the paranormal Spike, with the paranormal genre in general, you come across this problem of a female character with her monster boyfriends, and how do you make the female teenage girl appealing to the monster boyfriends? It's the problem of trying to prove why the magical man likes this normal teenage girl. And with the trend of the I'm Not Like Other Girls around that time, it it makes sense to disparage other women. So, Bella is chosen by Edward because she's somehow different or special or better than the other women around her because she doesn't act like them. Like, it makes perfect sense why the trajectory of the meme and YA fiction just kind of mesh together really well, and why they complement each other and why they appeared in so many different books. But with Bella, there's also a backlash because people start to criticize Bella and her counterparts for being damsels in distress. They start to counter her for saying they want more girls with personalities. And so I think we get a little bit of spike with like more snarky paranormal characters. I didn't read this series, but like the Vampire Academy series seems to be a good example of this paranormal shift where we have a little bit more snark in the main character. And then we go into the dystopian craze with the Hunger Games. With the dystopian character, there's this desire to have a female character that is stronger, that can do more, that is more in the action and less having action put upon her. So we get tough as nails, no feelings, devoid of like emotions main character. And this character has a lot of masculine traits, is very masculine, cannot relate to femininity or is not feminine. And then the turning point when we turned away from dystopian, when we all got sick of dystopian, I think we turned back to more traditional fantasy. And with the turn to traditional fantasy, the biggest standout bestseller in my mind is one, the Cassandra Clare books, which are paranormal but have a more fantastical feel to them, and then Sarah J. Maas with the Throne of Glass series. And with both Clary and the main character, Sarah J. Maas, I can't think of her name. What's her name? Elena? I don't remember. I read those books so long ago. But with that character, we turn back and get more of like the snarky, tough girl. And especially with the Sarah J. Maas character, we get the idea of the girly assassin. We get someone who might not always portray femininity, but they are very strong. In a lot of cases, they're very overpowered, in my opinion, especially with the Sarah J. Maas series. But we get a main character that has, a love of dresses or a love of shoes. Like, there's some way in connection to femininity. They like some type of fashion or something like that. But they are also very strong, very good at what they do, kick-ass girl boss kind of characters. Honestly, maybe there is a connection between, like, the Sarah J. Maas kind of character and the girl boss. Maybe. But I think what's interesting is that now we're kind of coming into a new wave of YA fiction, especially YA fantasy. And there's just a more diversity in genre choices. There's paranormal, dystopian, fantasy, high fantasy, low fantasy. There's like a range of different types of things, and there's also a range of different types of characters. We're getting a lot more people of color in these positions in fantasy novels. We're getting a lot more queer characters as the main character in a fantasy novel. And with this diversity of what a main character is in a YA novel, we're getting a lot more diversity in the characters themselves. They have different likes, different interests. And I think going forward, we're only going to see more diversity in how the characters act, what they like, what they look like, what they act like, who they like, all of that. That being said, I do want to say that there is one thing that just remains constant in the female character. A lot of times they are headstrong, stubborn, brash. If they're not snarky, they are brash as hell, doing the dumb move. I mean, it makes sense because that's kind of what you need for a saving the world story. Like, you need a character that initiates things and goes after things. Sometimes not in a good way, but it gets the story moving forward. It makes sense why there's always this kind of characteristic. So I'm particularly focused on the middle section of this trend, which is the female character that is masculine, who has no emotions, who does not connect to femininity, who does not want a boyfriend. I think this era in particular is very interesting and was very informative to me on a personal level. And I think the critique of female characters in general, especially this character, is so fascinating. In so many ways, this critique is really necessary. Again, because it has caused the trend for more diversity in YA heroines. But again, I want to call back to my first point, is that I think this critique in a lot of ways lacks a lot of nuance and understanding. We just boil these characters down to just being like too strong, hates femininity, is a Mary Sue, is overpowered, is not like other girls. So for me, in my opinion, what makes an other girl in fiction is that the girl has to outwardly hate other women a lot. In my opinion, if the female character does not like femininity, if they do not want to be associated with femininity, if they don't want to dress or act feminine, I personally do not count that as I'm not like other girls, because I think that there's a lot of girls who do not want to fit into that stereotype. There are a lot of girls who do not relate to femininity, and maybe some of it is internalized misogyny, but I think that there is a little bit more range to that as well. For me, not like other girls, they have to outwardly hate women for liking female things. And I think as people have kind of talked over this topic, we've kind of stumbled into a good argument is that, you know, we're looking back on this era and trying to figure out why we had internalized misogyny, why we thought of ourselves as not like other girls. And you know, it stemmed from the desire to be exemplary, to be better than other people around us. And it also stemmed from our feelings like we were outsiders, like we weren't fitting in. And for me in particular, I didn't feel like I fit in because I didn't feel compelled to be a part of these really strict gender roles that we grew up in, and I didn't feel like I fit into a female archetype. I liked feminine things, but I still couldn't relate to other girls my age a lot of times. So yes, there is internalized misogyny. I think a lot of us have figured that out and like kind of fixed that problem. Hopefully a lot of us have fixed that problem, have kind of grown out of this idea that we're better than other people. But I also want to touch on like the idea of feeling like an outsider or not feeling like you have a place. Because like when you're queer, neurodivergent, when you're a person of color, when you're a minority in any way, it's really easy, especially as a girl, to feel like you are on the outside. Because if you do not grow into what you're supposed to be, you will be hated. If you do exactly as you're told, you will be hated. It's just a lose-lose situation for every girl, basically. But I think it's especially difficult for anybody that feels like they're on the outside, which the other girls trend proves that most of us felt like that. But for me, the not like other girls trend has always been less about the misogyny I felt towards my peers. And for me now, looking back on that time, it's my younger self, my 13, 14-year-old self, identifying that I did not want to be perceived that the way people desired me to be. So let's get into two of my favorite female characters growing up who I still have very good feelings for. And that is Katniss of the Hunger Games and Katsa of Graceling. Very similar names. So these fit the archetypes of tough girls, very little emotion or stagnate emotion, have a hard time conveying emotion, stubborn, brash, have skills, use their skills, and a little bit of rejection towards feminine things. In my opinion, both characters are really well-written female characters. Their view of femininity and beauty is really important to the world that the author is setting up. It's really important to the plot. Both of these books, in my opinion, are really good because it's the characters' decisions and choices that make consequences happen and move the story forward. They're both character-driven YA novels, in my opinion. But Katniss, poor Katniss, has been put on the pedestal of misogynist, of not like other girls, of being too tough and outwardly hateful, I guess. So the video that I referenced at the beginning of this video had a quote. I have to look it up because I really searched for this quote and I could not find it in the first Hunger Games book, but there's this quote about Katniss and her friend Madge and how they connect and relate to each other because they don't gossip or act like the other female characters, like the other women in their village. They're both kind of shy, quiet, keep to themselves. It has to be in the second book because I literally could not find it in this one, but you know, maybe I missed it. I did want to say that I did end up finding this quote, and it is from Catching Fire, and it's actually a really, really interesting quote because it's in this section where Katniss is kind of catching us up to speed on things and kind of telling us, oh yeah, me and Madge, we're always kind of friends, but now since I've come back from the Hunger Games, I realized, you know, she really is my friend, and there's kind of like this acceptance that they fit in together and that they are good friends with each other because they don't relate to the other women in their village and they just can't really relate to their peers very easily. So it's a really, really interesting passage when it's in the context of the novel itself, because yes, maybe there is a little bit of internalized misogyny of not fitting in with the other girls and then kind of hating the things that they do and associating those things with femininity, but it's also just really interesting because Katniss is finding solace in another human being, someone her age for the first time, with another girl her age for the first time, and realizing that she does have a friend and that there are other people like her. So it's really, really interesting. And I do think, you know, there are probably some instances of Katniss, like, hating female characters, hating femininity, just not understanding it, but I think it operates in this world so uniquely. This book is about anti-capitalism, you know? It's hating on the capital, their extreme desire of wealth and beauty and, like, torture porn, basically. You know, this is a very specific critique and dig at a part of our own society. This book is so interesting in how it talks about beauty and how that affects our society. You know, there's that beautiful scene where Katniss is like getting glamored up and getting her like hair taken away from her arms and legs, and she's like so sad about it. I really related to that as a kid. And I think those sections to me have always been interesting because it feels less like Katniss is hating on the idea of femininity, but more that she doesn't want femininity enacted upon herself. Like, she does not want to be presented that way. And for me, that was always really important because, like, I don't know, I had a very contentious relationship with being outwardly feminine. And, you know, normally I am very outwardly feminine. I've only just started to experiment with more masculine styles of dress, as you can see, and hairstyles. I wear makeup, I wear dresses still, but it's always been a weird relationship with me and, like, the ideas of beauty and femininity. And I could really relate to Katniss growing up because of, you know, how she viewed it and how she couldn't really relate to it. I think that's the most important section, is that it's not really Katniss hating on women that display feminine traits, is that she doesn't understand it. Yes, there might be a little bit of misogyny towards Effie in particular, but, like, Katniss kind of learns from it and grows to really love Effie through the series. To me, Katniss has always been less of an outwardly disdain for other female characters and more this inward disdain for herself, and that she can't relate or understand femininity. And I think the most important scene to me is when Katniss dresses up in, like, the big phoenix dress or whatever and goes out to do this talk show that all the tributes have to do to try and get sponsors and people to like them. And Katniss is in line and she's looking at the interviews. She's watching everybody come up before her, and she's seeing that everybody has a set type. They're the cute one, they're the powerful one, they're the sexy one. There's, like, specific types that the female characters have to fall into, and Katniss is just watching them and, like, I can't fit into any of these. I can't be sexy, I can't be cute or innocent. Like, the only thing I can be is this hard, tough exterior like one of the male characters. But obviously I can't act like that because I'm not going to get any attention for doing that. People are not going to like that. And so when she goes up on stage, she, like, tries to imitate some of the other girls, tries to be herself. And what ends up happening is that Katniss, at the end of the day, doesn't hate the other female characters. She hates herself, and she feels inadequate. She feels shallow for acting the way she does because she doesn't feel like it comes off as genuine. She feels like the other characters can act their parts, basically, and that she can't fit in the same way. And for me, that was always a really important scene because when I enacted femininity in any way, I felt sometimes like I was being shallow, or that I wasn't portraying it correctly, or that I was always slightly off with my femininity, and it just felt inadequate. And it was always about my internal struggle versus, like, hating other women around me who were just doing it better than me. And then we have Katsa, who, I wasn't in this class, but I was talking to my professor who had them read this book for a class, and people were saying that Katniss was a not like other girls character, and I just flipped out because to me, Katsa has never been a not like other girls character. Katsa is very similar to Katniss. She's headstrong, she has her skills, her strength, she's good at fighting, and she just doesn't like wearing dresses. She doesn't like being feminine. I related to Katsa so much. She just, like, did not understand love. She did not know how to connect to people. She was just always a really important special character to me, and I really loved her. And I looked through the scene where Katsa is getting ready for a party. Maybe I missed it again. Maybe there are sections where Katsa hates other female characters that are more feminine than her, but, like, I've read this recently and I can't remember a moment like that happening. The closest we get is there's a moment where Katsa is getting dressed up again for this party, and she just doesn't want to wear a dress. She doesn't like them. She doesn't want to wear a lot of bright colors. And again, that's something I can relate to because when you are dressed in a certain way, it makes you stand out and it makes you feel uncomfortable, or at least sometimes it makes me feel uncomfortable. And I could just really relate to that. It's not Katsa ever, like, hating other women for doing those things. It's her hating herself because she doesn't feel comfortable in that presentation of femininity. Let's dive deeper into my own personal experiences with these characters and how they feel inadequate when they portray femininity, you know, how they can't relate to femininity. I think it's so interesting, and it's always been a really weird reflection of myself. So for both of these characters, they're really criticized, one for hating femininity, which we've kind of gone over in depth at this point, but they're also hated for being just like stone-faced, not connected to their emotions, having their love enacted upon them, not relating to or understanding love, being oblivious to love. And for me, those characteristics were just so important growing up. I have a weird connection with my emotions. I feel like I'm very outwardly emotional. I'm very moody, but at other times I feel very stone cold, like I just have this front, this shell, if you will, of like really cold emotions. And so I really related to these characters who I saw as like very emotional, very brash, very moody, but portrayed that moodiness in anger, in physicality, who portrayed these emotions in action, and a lot of times just couldn't relate to either softer emotions or just more complicated feelings, like they had a really hard time with that. To me, that was just always really, really relatable. And then the other thing is the thing about love. The weird connection with romance. At this moment, I identify as pansexual, but more important than my pansexuality is that I am on the Arrow A spectrum, which means I am not normally, not a lot of times, sexually or romantically attracted to people. I sometimes find people aesthetically pleasing or aesthetically interesting, want to be friends with people, have very intense platonic feelings, but a lot of times I just don't feel romantic or sexual attraction towards people. And you know what? These two characters don't feel sexual or romantic attraction to people a lot of times. And when they do, it's in very specific circumstances, and it makes sense to me. I think queer women in general growing up in this time of YA fiction can really connect to these like hard-ass characters. One, because of their presentation and like relationship to femininity and portraying femininity. I think it's okay that not all of us want to look feminine all the time. I don't think we hate women because we want to portray ourselves in different ways, because we fit on the gender or identity spectrum in different ways. And I think it's also okay for us to relate to emotionless characters or characters that are oblivious to romance or don't understand romance, because we ourselves either, don't relate to the idea of liking men, or we don't relate to the idea of liking anything. To me, both of these characters were demisexual and demi-romantic. Like, they didn't have the romantic feelings, and that's okay. I think Katniss especially is a popular headcanon as demi. So I didn't really finish my thought here before I went into my personal anecdote with this character, so I just wanted to kind of conclude that having these kind of characters that express emotions in different ways is really valuable, because it's a way for people to see themselves in other characters. So it's really easy to be dismissive of characters, to say they're oblivious, to say, they don't understand love and that that's not realistic, but, maybe there's something more there that we're not looking at closely enough because it's outside of our own experiences. Growing up, when I had these feelings, like, I just didn't get the idea of people having fictional crushes, of people having real life crushes, of celebrity crushes. I just did not understand it. I did not want to be involved with it. I did not want PDA at all. Like, it was a complicated time, and I just didn't understand my feelings, and nobody else could relate to me in the way that I understood myself. I wanted romantic partners. I wanted to explore the same things that my peers wanted, but I didn't want them in the same ways that they wanted. And when reality came into play, like, I just wasn't interested in anybody around me. I think I had 2 crushes in high school. For 4 years, I only had 2 crushes, and one of them I didn't even acknowledge because it was a girl, obviously. So just having these strong, stony female characters who could not relate to emotions was just so valuable to me as a person. Because it was like, finally, someone who cannot relate to the same things that other girls can. I had some internalized misogyny and some problems back then where I was just like, ugh, these other girls who are chasing after boys, so shallow. Obviously, I've gotten over that now, and I understand myself now, so I don't really have that problem anymore. But it wasn't just misogyny. It was also like, I don't understand my peers around me. I don't understand how people could be boy crazy. Like, people are just not that interesting. Why are people so invested in romance? Why are people so invested in being in a relationship? I did not get it, but these characters got it for me. And I think that distinction is really important. I think there's nuance there with these characters and how we see them. It's not just that they don't like femininity or that they hate other girls, it's that they don't want to portray femininity. And it's not just that they hate romance, they think other girls are shallow for not liking romance, it's that they cannot connect to it, and that they're oblivious to it, or, you know, it's just weird for them, or it's not as important to them. And I think acknowledging the nuance there and kind of looking at the female characters that we criticize a little bit more deeply is really important, because when we boil it down to like, these characters are Mary Sue's, they're damsels in distress, they're too tough, they're not tough enough, we're doing the same thing that we do to real life women, is just boiling them down to really specific archetypes and not looking at the nuance there. Even going back to the paranormal damsel in distress character, I think we need to look at those characters in a deeper lens, because it's like, why do we portray women as damsels in distress? Why do we have these self-insert characters where they don't have a lot of personality? What are readers getting out of those situations? Is it just wish fulfillment? Is it just, you know, giving girls a fantasy, a desire? Is that enough for a book, or do we always need to have well-written novels all the time? What kind of value do readers get out of these kind of characters? I think the critiques are valid. I think that they're really good and really helpful, especially if we want more diversity in our YA heroines. But I think it's also important to look back at these older characters, not hate on them just because they're shallow or headstrong or, you know, don't have any emotions. I think we need to look at, why did so many people find these characters valuable? Is there more nuance there than we're giving them credit for? Are these characters really misogynistic, or are we kind of putting on our own misogyny onto these characters? As with all things where we criticize women, I think we need a smidgen of nuance. This was a long-ass discussion. I was just kind of flying off the seat of my pants with my feelings on this one, but I hope I was able to portray some of my thoughts and feelings about these characters. The stone cold hard bitch character is always just going to be a favorite of mine. It's just something I still relate to, whether they're portraying femininity or not. It's just something that's always been like, yes, my jam. And I think it's important to admit that we all might have our things that we like to indulge in and like. If you like the damsel in distress character, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a damsel in distress. Just because you like the stubborn, headstrong, brash character doesn't mean that you act that way. In my opinion, I am loving the turn in the YA fantasy genre. We're getting more diversity in the types of characters. We're getting more diversity in what they like, in their interests. And I think that's the biggest thing about breaking down female archetypes, is just having an array of different female characters and how they act and how they're portrayed and what they like and what they do. That gives us the spectrum of what it means to be a woman. I have a soft spot in my heart for some of these characters, and they will remain important to me for very specific reasons, and I think that's okay to acknowledge. We don't have to outwardly tear down every single female character until they're nothing but bones. But thank you so much for watching this long, hopefully not too rambly of a video. If you were a teen when these books were published, let me know how you felt about them reading them. If you're the younger generation, I would especially like your opinion, because I feel like how we look at these characters now versus how we looked at these characters while they were being written is very different and very interesting. But yeah, this was such a fun video to do, so thank you so much for listening to me. I hope you guys enjoyed, and as always, happy reading.